Hi, I'm Debbie Braun, president of the Aspen Chamber Resort Association, and you're watching this edition of Aspen Affairs. I'm beating a drum, everyone. Local election season. Have you heard me say once? Have you heard me say twice? I'm going to say it for a third time. We've got a local election, and it is so incredibly important for our community to be heard, and the way you're heard is to come out and to vote. The local election starts on March 7th. Ballots are going to be mailed out on February 14th leading up to the election, and we are going to invite all the candidates to come in person over the next 2 weeks and do a forum/debate in person, so we hope you'll join us for that when we announce the date and the time. But in the meanwhile, I'm here in the studio with some really amazing candidates. Anybody who wants to take the time to run for city council, man. Ooh, sorry, Mike.
Or woman.
Man or woman, man. Massive respect there. But today we get Skippy Mesirow. Skippy, hi. Dun. Thank you for joining us. You currently are a 4-year council member, just finishing up your first term and asking to get reelected. So tell us a little bit about yourself for maybe some of the community who maybe is not familiar with you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, community that's not familiar with me. It's nice to meet you. Welcome if you're new from the last 4 years. A lot of new, awesome people that we've met.
Lots.
You know, I'm, I guess, typical immigrant to Aspen, came from Chicago. My grandparents started coming here back in the 50s.
Okay.
They initially bought property, condo in Aspen in 64. Unfortunately, they sold it in 67. And so, you know, I grew up coming here, as did my mom and my uncle. They ended up buying Tamarack and Snowmass. And so before the mountain opened, they were there. And Stein taught my mom and my uncle to ski. I was on skis at 18 months here.
Wow.
I was always obsessed with this place for obvious reasons. And to be honest, my life at home was challenging in a number of ways. And I graduated early from high school. 4 days after I turned 18, I was driving to Aspen at 5 in the morning.
Wow.
Taught skiing, was a competitive skier, went to CU Boulder, left for a few years for the real world, and then realized that's dumb. I think I'll come back.
Please hold, real world.
And so I've been back here full-time year-round since 2011.
Okay.
I've been involved in the political space in a number of ways since really before high school. I got to know Jared, our governor, volunteering on his congressional campaign as a freshman in college. I went on to work for Obama during OFA 08 and then inauguration, transition. I ran a statewide race at 23. And then I spent enough time in Chicago politics to think I will never do this again.
Ooh.
And then very unexpectedly got kind of dragged back in here. We started the Next Gen Commission. We ran a ballot initiative that resulted in the highest voter participation ever in history. We focused on housing and childcare. I ended
You're
up serving.
talking as a we now.
Yeah.
Do you have a split personality?
Yeah, sometimes. We being Next Gen.
Next Gen,
Next
okay.
Gen, that group. I want to make sure everyone has credit. There was 11 of us, and a lot that came after. And we did those things. I didn't do those things, but I was part of it, and that felt really good. Thank you for the catch.
Yeah.
And yeah, P&Z, and you know, I just sort of quickly learned that at a local level, you could really get a lot done.
Yeah.
Ran for office, lost, ran again, won, and now I've served for 3.5 years, and here we are.
Here we are. What do you think those top 3 priorities are you for the next 4 years? So you've accomplished quite a bit in the first 4 years. So do you have your eye on something specific over these next 4 years?
We have really, especially in the last year and a half, gotten a lot done. I've really watched things that seem to be in a holding pattern above the Aspen airport all of a sudden come into land in the last year and a half, and that's felt really good. I feel...
Name a few of those things for the community.
Well, I mean, my number one priority is always housing, right?
Yeah.
So we have a housing strategic plan for the first time ever, the only community I know that has one. 14 independent interventions into how we deliver housing, everything from getting back old deed restrictions to building the lumberyard to public-private partnerships to new models of housing delivery. We are making our existing stock better. We have a program to help with capital improvements to address it's a pilot program, but to address the sort of inequity of asking someone to pay a 1/10 free market price and then have to pay a free market contractor. We're doing right sizing to address the deficit internally. We have a requirement around the upkeep of the internal unit. So, I mean, just in that one bucket, we could literally have a 2-hour conversation.
Yeah.
There's a lot. And my observation and my recognition is one of the things that I am, for whatever reason, particularly good at is being able to see multiple steps down the road. I, in many ways, was talking about a lot of the problems that we went, oh my God, this problem in COVID 10 years ago. And so I feel like it's my opportunity and really obligation to bring forth a number of very specific policy changes that can serve as transformational, like root cause issues that make everything else better. So I do have 3 specific issues that I'm focused on. It's not because I think it's everything we need to do, but I think if we do these 3 things, everything else will function better. The first is reinventing the way that our government actually functions, the process by which we bring things forward through the sunsetted funding and operation of a government office of innovation. The second is a transition of our downtown core to a people-first core, complete with local business districts, a reemergence of the commons and those things that we all say we really miss from back in the day. And then lastly, a new model for delivering affordable housing, a development neutral model, or a model that does not require new development, that is based on our just voter-approved STR tax, a hopefully in the future voter-approved vacancy tax, and then a program to take those funds and put them in the hands of local developers aligning interests or individuals to buy down existing property.
3 lofty goals. Wow. Let's talk about how do you achieve that? So let's just take downtown. You said pedestrian friendly or car free? Am I hearing that?
The way I think about it is a people first core. So just to kind of like paint the vision for you, right? We would remove the private vehicles from the downtown core. We would create ample parking outside the core with free, on-demand, all-electric transportation in. And then you would have vehicles in the core that would eventually be, autonomous electric, but we need to get there, that you, Debbie, pick up your phone, just like the downtowner, and you can get to wherever you want to go, when you want to go, no traffic, no congestion, directly to that store. You've got room for your goods. And of course, for fire safety and the rest of it, you have to maintain, kind of a quarter of the block for that use and for the fire trucks, but also for the delivery. So it's not entirely vehicle free, but it does allow us to reallocate potentially the highest price, most scarce resource in this country from the things that are just sort of servicing what we want in terms of cars to the things that we all claim we want, which is local affordable business, opportunities for community, sense of place, connection, and parks.
Where are we going to park the cars?
Outside of town.
Outside of town.
Outside of town.
Okay. So that certainly would, the downtown businesses say it's a business core. We have to do business activities. There's restaurants. So not everyone's going to be on your team on that. So my question would be, how do you lead people through that process? How do you not divide us, but bring us together?
So it's a really good question, and there is not a perfect answer to it. My experience is that we are incredibly gifted in so many ways as a community. We have really done the most of what is possible with the architecture that we have, but it's an architecture that in many cases was designed around the problems and conditions of the 1980s and in the form of government, really the 1880s or 1780s, right?
Yeah.
And so what we need is new architecture, new tools to deliver the same results that we've always wanted and sought after. I mean, I've been spending time with, Joe Edwards and Michael Kinsley. Our past campaigns had, brought us on them and Art Daly, and I have so much reverence for what these people did. And we have to remember that at the time, this is the initial platform from the 60s from Joe Edwards. The walkable core is in there, parks and open space is in there, affordable housing is in there. Literally all the things that we think of as central to what make Aspen Aspen, and we often take for granted, they were here and they were very controversial at the time. But the approach was not a controversial one. The approach was, let's reach out to everyone and recognize that the ideas that we're putting out, we're not putting them out saying, this is what we must do and this is right. I'm not doing that. What I'm saying is we know that the current model we're operating on cannot deliver the future we want. We have to look to that future and be bold enough and honest enough to put out what is possible and then invite people into the conversation with the recognition of whatever those people who don't respond positively to or have better ideas, the emergent reality that's, let's be honest, 10 or 20 years from now is going to be far better than anything I put out now.
Well, it's interesting because you used two examples. One, looking back. So you're looking back into the history to say, here are some of these campaigns, but there's new people in Aspen. There's new circumstances. There's new challenges. So are you forward thinking? Because you just talked about forward. So are you honoring the history, but trying to find innovation or innovative 21st century solutions for that?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we would be crazy to not truly honor, revere, and revive that initial spirit from the 1960s that we are so lucky to have inherited. I mean, we truly stand on the shoulders of giants in any universal standard.
Yeah.
And I think we are always wise to look at history to inform what we do today and to ground us in that same set of values. And to your point, to achieve the same end with new condition, you need new tools, right? So like think about the affordable housing piece, right? Affordable housing was extremely controversial back in the 60s and 70s. I mean, Joe's told me stories about having people come into his office with loaded pistols. Okay, we don't do that anymore.
No.
Right? It's gotten better, not worse. That was the feeling. This is anathema to the American experience. Everyone now says, of course, we should have it. And we existed in a place where the primary reason we needed affordable housing, 70s and 80s, was you had vacant lots that built buildings that created new jobs and those people had nowhere to live. But that's not what's been happening since the 90s. I mean, for decades, the downtown has been effectively built out, maybe one or two lots. We can think about the Art Museum, for instance. And those buildings, increasingly looking forward, there's going to be automation. And our building codes are 2 stories, not 3, right? So that's not where the issue is. The issue is that we used to have the majority, at one point 100% of our workforce living in naturally occurring affordable housing, which over time transitioned to STRs and then to vacancy, right? So we've had a displacement effect within the residential sector. And so we have different drivers. And if we want to solve that problem to the same end of housing our workforce, we're going to need different solutions. Did any of that make sense?
Wow. Rewind the tape, people. You've thought about this, and that's wonderful. But Skippy, you're bringing up ideas that are maybe some people would consider radical, like the core or the housing, or maybe we're oversimplifying. Short-term rentals have now taken away the housing base because so many people will tell you those monster homes were never going to rent in the first place to the local workforce. So with all of this soup, is how it feels, what do you do to lead us out of it? Lead us as a community, because you're a community leader. So you understand these challenges. You're acutely aware of them. What is the council and what would you do to not divide us but bring us together?
Well, let's take the STR and the moratorium as an example, right? Because that was something that has been perceived by many to be divisive. And, we always have to ask the question and check our homework, right? Is that true? Because ultimately as government, it's our job and our responsibility to get the process right. So when I look at that, we took on a big problem. You can't do anything important without some people not wanting to go along with it, right? If no one is paying attention, then you're really not getting anything done. And what you are doing implicitly in that choice is you are agreeing with the status quo. And you are saying, as a leader, I'm just going to sit back and let these trends that most people would describe as negative continue. And I don't think that we can do that. So, we called a timeout and we brought everyone into the tent. I mean, there were thousands of meetings and conversations. There was a huge amount of data. There was qualitative feedback. There were hundreds of people in the room. We genuinely listened to all of them. There were very significant changes on all of that legislation because of the development community. And not for the worse, but for the better, right? So we did that. Now you get to the end of that and not everyone is necessarily going to agree. And then our job our accountability is to say, how could that process have been better? And I can tell you, it could have been better. There is significant work that we need to do to address how we do things in government. It really isn't functioning. It's not just an Aspen problem, it's a democratic world problem, but I do think we're particularly well suited to solve it, and that should be our responsibility. We should do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good example that you brought up, and I'm just curious because it is so heady, it is so new, these short-term rentals, and it really started with people coming into the council chamber saying, hey, over in the West End, there's noise, there's trash, there's impacts to our neighborhood that these short-term rentals are causing. So it was really a good idea to convene, and I would agree, there were user groups, there were meetings, a lot of stuff was going on, but this is kind of a complicated issue with some things that were happening, like a COVID, new trends that were sort of coming on top of. So I want to understand why you guys just didn't keep working on the issue, but decided to put it on the November ballot, but not enact it to May. So from November to May, are we doing any fine tuning of it, or what are we doing, and why didn't we put it on the March ballot?
I'm going to apologize to everyone because we're just going to get into more complexity here. But no, but this is super. But this is really illustrative, right?
Yeah.
Full disclosure: I run a vacation rental company. I don't own it, but I run it. That's my full-time job. That's how I can afford to be on council, right? I joke it's my public service subsidy, and it's true. And so that is an example of where the council listened to the industry. With the government hat on, it's easy to say, well, this rule will be better for the community. Now is better than later. Let's do it. But that's not the reality of how you transition things. It's not the reality of you run a business. If that rule came down on that day and I or any number of other people in the profession had to turn around to their clients and say, hey, I know you booked this a year and a half ago, but we're now going to charge you 5 or 10% more. It's going to go on your credit card today. Forget about when you are or aren't getting paid and if it's overdrafted. Have a good time in Aspen, and we hope you love it here. It's just not realistic, right? And so there is a period to phase that in so that it is reflective of reality.
Okay, so we talked about, I think, some really great, at the beginning, kind of some 3 accomplishments and some things that we're getting done, and we're actually making some movement, which is really exciting. Tell me about some of the missteps you think that have occurred over the last 4 years, and what we're doing to...
Personal or collective?
Both, please. No, just collectively on the council. Do you think there were some missteps that happened in the last 4 years, and could you identify them? Have you reflected, and would you do anything different?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the Living Lab was kind of a disaster all around.
Okay.
And so when I look at that and I evaluate why, because there'll be a variety of missteps, but the reason for the misstep and how you want to correct is different.
Yeah.
The continuity is you learn from everything. Everything in life is a learning opportunity. And this is central to my life, it's central to my leadership. Whether, I really believe there are no bad experiences in life.
Yeah.
There are either enjoyable ones or ones you learn from.
Yeah.
And life is a blessing in that way. So when I look, and this is my interpretation, when I look at the Living Lab, that to me was an example of, a horse designed by committee equals a camel, right? We each, as decision makers, had sort of different visions of where we wanted to go in our heads. I certainly had a clear vision of where I want to go in my head, right? And in that sort of conversation of the commons, or at least I thought, my thought process is, I'm going to trust in the process, I'm going to trust in the wisdom of all of this. And so I am 100% responsible, as are the rest of us, for it. But at the end of the day, we didn't have clear vision. And so we had a sort of assembly by parts solution that just totally didn't work. We also had complications with construction timing, with COVID, with communication. So it simply didn't work. And we have to own that. I do think what's worse than not working is not trying. But what would I do differently? I think the Living Lab is a great example of why I'm pushing for this government Office of Innovation. And just to kind of give you the bookmark or the Cliff's Notes on this, it's a recognition that this 18th century tool designed to solve for 19th century problems is not meeting 21st century expectations. We don't feel seen, we don't feel heard, we don't feel included. We've lost trust in government. When I say we, I mean us in Aspen, but I really mean the entire democratic world. We see this everywhere, and trust is the oil of democracy. It which lubricates the engine, and we have to reclaim it, right? We don't have all the answers. I can't tell you how to solve this. I can give you some ideas. I can talk about campaign finance reform and how that would make campaigns more equitable in terms of who we represent and how. Right? I can talk about city council meeting procedure and simple interventions we can make to make sure that we are hearing opposing opinion, that we're getting devil's advocate position, that we're doing a better job of evaluating things. Like, I can give you some stuff, but the truth is we just don't know. But what is Aspen? It is a place that since the 1940s has been the place for the best minds in the world to convene and solve national and international problems. So why don't we lean into that? Why don't we fund an office for 4 years, partner with institute, et cetera, bring in the best minds in governance and reform, whether they are authors, theoreticians, technologists, bring them in and hand them the keys to City Hall and say, hey, full access. Right? Look at everything, leave no stone unturned, and tell us what you think we should do, and we will leverage our privilege to try it in a place that can be model for other communities and solve our own problems. And if we partner in that implementation process with the rest of our watershed, down to Rifle and Silt, then we mirror much of the American experience. Rural, diverse, Republican, and I think that's like an incredible thing that we as a community have an opportunity to do. And that'll take some time. It should be time limited. But 4 years from now, the way we have that conversation about the living lab or about a moratorium or about environmental policy is going to be quite different, and we can hope much better.
I guess the place I struggle a little bit, so I'm assuming maybe the residents will struggle too, is I think of like the Aspen Institute, and they did the transportation forum, and that was over like years of bringing in the best of the best to discuss transportation, local transportation as well. What's the outcome from that?
Well, I think the distinction is that forum is about a policy and not a process.
Okay.
A process yields whatever policy you aim it at. A policy at the end of the day is going to come to some technocratic solution that is then subject to public opinion, right? And so it's really a very different thing. What ACRA decides to do with chamber pass rates is going to probably ruffle feathers no matter what that rate is, but how you choose to staff your office, who you empower to do that, and whether you're doing good decision making is something quite different. And that's really what I'm talking about, is that framework.
Well, that's a very good example then. Yeah. Good. All right, we're talking about missteps, and I think it's really interesting because both you and Tori point to a misstep, and both of you say the Galena lab.
Oh, we did.
You both said the exact same thing. But the new candidate, who's not on council, Sam Rose, pointed to a different misstep, which is early childhood education and closing a room at
I agree
the Yellow
Sam.
Brick.
I agree.
So that seemed to affect a lot of families and ruffled a lot of feathers.
I agree.
So is that misstep I feel like Galena's the easy one, but these families really were under a lot of duress. Is there anything like with the hindsight now that you would have done differently as a council, maybe because I think the goal was great. You wanted to offer more days available for childcare for our workforce.
Well, think about what happened, right? And 100% agree that would have loved to handle that differently. We'll also say that as a result of all that pushback and frankly pain for many families, and I'm of the age where all my friends have kids, so I hear about it. At the end of the day, that caused us to significantly pivot our thinking and invest in people and job retention and recruitment and as opposed to just development, right? So,
but Kids First has been doing all of what you just said.
Not
for
in
a
the way we
while.
have, not with nearly the resources that we have, not with the partnerships that we have. So I think we're now on the right track because we screwed this up. And so let's recognize that. But think about what happened. You had a council that said top 3 things in all of Aspen, childcare, right? So there was strong intention. There was a staff behind it. There's a Kids First board who obviously volunteers their time because they greatly care about these outcomes. You have teachers at the Yellow Brick who care about their kids, and yet it didn't go well. Somewhere in the game of telephone that happens between the city council table and that board and those deliverers of care and those parents, something broke down. That tells me it's a systems problem, and we need to change the system.
And how are we going to do that?
We're going to open an office of government innovation. We're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
I'm not,
I feel like CMC is bringing forward a collaboration with the city to open up a daycare right on the CMC campus. And that is, the city's running it, but they're just providing the room. So I think that's a really great, and I think that's happening in some of the new developments, the Burlingame development as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are, without getting way too in the weeds, this is one of the most highly regulated, for reasons you would understand, areas in our state. You know, I remember we started having conversations early in COVID, and I was saying, like, I know a lot of moms who are giving up, you know, 80% of their income to childcare, probably would be open to 20% less money and all the time with their kids, but you can't do it in your home. You can't. There's all these state and federal regulations, and so, you know, I mean, there's a lot of different avenues that we can and should explore.
You know, I'm a former board member of Kids First, and I started Roaring Fork Kids back in the day. So childcare for 22 years has been a real issue in our community. It's not anything new. It's just getting, you know, there's so many reasons for us to leave the valley. It's $1,000 a month to have 2 kids. The insurance rates in our valleys can be so high, and wages, and you got to fight to stay here. And we are lucky, I'd like to just finish on, that we do have resources and organizations like Kids First and support from the city to help sort of tackle these problems, so we're not just tackling them as like little parents on our own.
And we have private donors finally showing up. I mean, we really are blessed to be in a community that, you know, I can't say everyone, but basically everyone is extremely invested in all the ways, and we really care about this town, and we go to work for it. And there are not many places in the world like that.
Listen, I had more questions to ask you. I was going to go deep on
I'll keep going.
How many taxes has this town seen that they're not going to pass, and vacancy taxes and STR taxes.
Can we talk about the vacancy tax?
We cannot talk about any of it because we're out of time. So come join us for our in-person debate forum that we're going to have with all the candidates, and we are really going to stick it to you at that point. Today was just light and fluffy, so I really am impressed that you're continuing to care about our community and run. If anybody's interested in your platform, do you have a website anyone can go to?
It is skippyforaspen.com. You can go there directly. You get all of the specific policy, kind of broad overview. You can donate. You can write a letter to the editor. You can write me an angry email. It's all available to you.
Well, you take those angry emails very well. So thank you for joining this edition of Aspen Affairs. Just a reminder, we've got a local election coming up. Ballots will be in the mail on February 14th for the March 7th election. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you.